Today I just felt like sitting down and talking about the IWC Pilot series. Not the big Pilot, but the standard Pilot. And I want to try and get a couple of things across. Not only the fact that I really appreciate them and their design, which we will unpack, but also that this current collection is such a deviation from where it was 30 years ago that it would be nice if there were a few changes. At times it feels like I am revealing all of my trade secrets in these videos, but you know what? If it means that I can help guide someone to these excellent watches, that's what I'm here for. That's what I've always been here for. Let's get to it, enough with the sentimental stuff. In the last year and a half, the one watch and the brand that I have looked at the most, that I've returned to the most, is the IWC Mark series of Pilot watches. And at a time like now and into the future, we have so many opportunities to pick up these pieces for under retail, discounts, even second-hand. So what is the aim of this video? I want to bring attention to these pieces and their designs a bit more, but also discuss the conflicting nature with the current IWC Mark XX Pilot design compared to what they were like 20, 30 years ago, and question the very foundations they are built on. But along with that, I also want to try and break down why I think they're such great watches to pick up, if you can, for a great price, especially right now. Let's get this out of the way. Over the last few years, we have been quite critical of IWC and some of their practices, no? Whether it's the new management, or the fact that they're not necessarily listening to all of us enthusiasts and our opinions, whether some of their design directions have changed in a couple of places, or whether their prices, they seem really out of reach. Now, IWC has never been seen as an accessible brand like some other names. They have been ahead of the curve in a lot of areas. I think Kurt Klaus, as I'm recording this video, is celebrating his 90th birthday. You know, in the realms of watchmaking, they have had some incredible feats. Their perpetual calendars, they're untouchable. They were the first brand to commit to and experiment with titanium cases, ceramic cases. The 1980s and the 1990s, a very special period for the brand. I won't go down the rabbit hole. The criticism they receive today, the Salita-based movements, the prices they're charging, a couple of quality control issues, a couple of teething issues. And I think alongside that, when we look to Pilot-inspired watches and those historic pieces, there are so many more viable options from many other brands for a third of the price that you can find today. But leaving all of that aside, IWC does have a distinct impact and a language with their pieces that they create. Even though we're talking about Pilot watches today, when you go down the road of the Da Vinci, the Portuguese, the Ingenieur, these are some very, very nice pieces. So I thought to myself, a timeline is going to be involved in this. If we're going to discuss the designs, what has changed, let's start with the most current watch and work our way backwards, which is something that we don't do very often. So what is it about the Mark series of Pilot watches that appeals to us so much? Go anywhere, do anything. It's a subject I've covered a lot over the last few months. It's the idea that you have a watch that is very discreet in a lot of ways, very unrecognizable, covers all of your bases. It's not only versatile when it comes to strap changes, but it's also just practical on a day-to-day basis with a water resistance rating, a date complication. The Mark series of pieces from IWC, they very much epitomize what a high-end field watch should be. Adding those two words together, high-end and field watch, doesn't really sound right, but you get the picture. But at this stage, this is the niche and the avenue that they are experimenting with. The IWC Mark XX, it's the most recent variant in this family and has had a lot of good coverage. From the interchangeable straps to a lot of improvements they have made to the dial, adjusting the space and the aperture, it is essentially a more improved and refined Mark XVIII. And look, for me, I'm not shy to admit it that the number one watch at the top of my list that I've been spending the most time looking at and returning back to is the Blue Dial Mark XX. I think it offers so much in the realms of what they've done improving its power reserve. And the aesthetics on its dial, I think it's a big thing that they have improved over the Mark XVIII. The adjustment of space, the placement of the numerals and how they work very well with the date complication. And the beauty is, even though these watches are only a few years old, you can find them for great prices if you look hard enough. Now, not as accessible as Tudor watches that we've already covered on this channel, but pretty close. And we are talking about an entirely different niche of watch here. Now we're getting into the meat of the video. Here is the one thing that always confuses me about this range, and I think in a large part has influenced the fact that I have not picked one up yet. See, the thing is with IWC, is that they were playing both sides of the field historically. Through the 40s and the 50s, they were supplying watches to the German military as well as to the Allied forces. This is to do with their geographic placement, that they're on the border with Switzerland, but are also German, so they could do both. So where the big Pilot has a crystal clear inspiration, the Mark series, it's become an amalgam watch. One that has almost 2/3 German inspiration and 1/3 RAF inspiration. Now to me, I cannot wrap my head around it. Logically, it makes sense. It's recognizable. The handset, what they have chosen, it's a part of the brand at this stage. But why should this collection be the same as the Big Pilot? That is my argument. Especially when, and if you know the history of this brand, they have the most beautiful field watch design at their disposal. We refer to a piece like the Spitfire, which is a blatant mishmash of German elements, British elements. They did so many things right, but there are also elements that feel off about it. The thing is, in recent years, they have created a tribute watch. The tribute to the Mark XI, which was housed in a Mark XVIII platform. Now, when we take a step back and we admire what they have done here, what is not to like about this piece? The black date window, the clear numeral placement, the hook on the 7, the gorgeous and iconic handset. So we ask ourselves, where did this transition start? Well, the Mark XVI, I think, was the cause of it. The mid-2000s, obviously the Big Pilot popularity was taking off, and they thought, well, let's miniaturize it and put it in a slightly smaller watch. Now the thing is, you ask anyone who is a fan of the Mark series of watches, you ask them what the grail is in this category, and they will say it's the Mark XV or the Mark XII. These pieces came out right at the turn of the 21st century. You know, Y2K, between the year 2000 and 1994. IWC was on a roll with this collection. And you don't need me to sit here and talk them up. They are exquisite looking watches. You know immediately that they belong to IWC, you know where the inspiration has come from. But they've added all the other details that we want. They've brought them up in size slightly, they've added a date complication. This was at a time when they were using ETA-based movements, they were bulletproof, well regulated. And I think it boils down to the fact that when I look to the Mark XX today and I compare it to the Mark XII of 1994, the Mark XII knows exactly what it is. And there is nothing about its design that leaves us scratching our head. I look to a watch like the Mark XII, the Mark XV, and I compare it to a piece like the Rolex Explorer. Why is it that the Rolex Explorer is so popular? Beyond the name, the advertising, the branding, it's because its design has been unchanged since 1953. Whether you look at the most earliest variant, or the 6610, the 1016, the 124270, or the most recent model. Yes, maybe a couple of features have changed, but it is largely the same watch. But it still represents that sense of adventure and that classic nuance that made it what it is. And I just feel, looking at this timeline going backwards, that this collection has lost its way in a sense. Now maybe this is just something that we enthusiasts share. Maybe it's the simple fact that the Mark XI design is nowhere near as marketable as the Flieger-inspired design. The recognizability is an extremely important part of marketability. But the irony is, if I was given the opportunity to inject some new life into this range, I would be looking back 30 years. And my variant of the Mark XXII would be taking a lot of elements from that period and splicing them together with what they have now. If you know me and know this channel well, you know that I like questioning the status quo and asking these sorts of questions. This might be such a personal vendetta I have against this watch. And most of you probably don't mind, and you prefer the design of the Mark XX. But I think what has always held me back looking at these modern examples is that there is quite a severe deviation from where it used to be. And I just so wish that the inspiration behind these pieces was clearer. Call me an optimist, but I think they would make a killing if the Mark XI became the poster child of this range. It is one of the most distinct and elegant pieces to have ever graced the wrist of a pilot. And you see, the thing is, with no other influence, IWC, they made it that way. And they could do it again. So taking all of that to heart, what have I tried to say in this video? I do think the Mark series of pieces, they are brilliant in their own right. Even though I find it very head-scratching that nearly all of the elements belonging to the Mark XV have been lost in favor of a more Flieger-inspired piece instead. I am constantly returning to this watch and looking at it again and again, because there is something about it that appeals to me. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I am of that opinion that if you are a brand that has a significant X factor and a design that is so pivotal and important to your name, that is so instantly recognizable, why not use it? Instead of dedicating so much time to the Flieger side of the family, why not look to the other side of the spectrum like you did once upon a time? So what began as a semi-structured video turned into a rant of sorts, but I hope I got my point across. As much as I admire the Mark series of watches and what they do, I think there is so much untapped potential in this family that deserves to be here. So I would like to know your opinion on this. Hypothetically, if you were given the choice between the Mark XX and the Mark XI, which would you go after and why? Do you, like me, feel that this range has become more of an amalgamation, greatest hits piece, instead of something that's a bit more refined and true to its origin? And thank you for taking the time to watch this ramble, and I'll see you in the next one.